Hi there, it's John here from the Warlock's Tower with another YouTube battle report, playing once again against James with his Saurian Ancients. We have the setup with the attacker and defender where he's pushing forward to try and encircle me. Pretty scary encirclement units to start with. We've got some skink poison javelin guys, a salamander. Next, into the middle, we've got some scouting chameleons. Behind that, we have a bus of Cold One guys represented by the High Elves. On the left is his general, Old Blood. Now, his setup was affected by my spells, so we'll see a bit more of that. Next is a unit of Saurus, again with the Cold Run Rider in there, and then next to that is a Skink Prox unit. So we've got his general represented by a High Elf guy. He has a great weapon, he has a 1-up save. He's got no magic, so I think it's him who has the no magic user scroll, which comes in very important. Next we have the guy again with a 1-up, and he has a flaming lance. And then in the Skink Prox unit we have his BSB, and he has a great weapon and a 1-up re-rollable save. So it's pretty good, pretty solid. In front of that, again, some poison skinks. The base, which becomes a base with some Temple Guard on it, is the Stygiosaur. And then to the left of that is another Salamander. So, yeah, pretty symmetrical sort of setup. The bus would have been a lot more scary, would have had all three Cold One heroes in there, but I rolled the spell which allows me to hit a unit, pick three models, and do strength 10 hits on all of them. So he decided to split up the threat. Possibly not a bad idea anyway, but yeah, it changed the battle quite significantly, that one spell that I rolled. And then he's got another unit of camo skinks on the far side again to loop around and threaten, particularly my terror dice. I think he's thinking that Poison Tune will be pretty good against that high toughness model. So the two towers you see are objective markers, so they're to be held by scoring units at the end of the game for an extra 3 victory points. So my setup is I've got a unit of zombie goblins on my left. They're basically there just to gradually walk forward and hopefully take that objective on my left, maybe survive long enough to do that. Next to that is a unit of dire wolves at the back, 2 units of bat swarms. The spirit host is just because I haven't converted another squid bat yet, so he'll have to do for now. Next to that is the Orc Boys. Ghostly are the Hex Wraiths. Behind that is my Terror Dice spitting out some Squig Scream. And then next to that we have my bus. So the Ghostly Wolves are representing Black Knights. They'll have goblins converted to go on them. In that unit is, on the left, is my Vampire Lord. It's a Blood Dragon, has Crimson Rage to allow it to hopefully rack up a ton of wounds. He has the magic sword from the Vampire Camp book, hopefully to put wounds back into the Blood Knights as he racks up those kills. So he's +1 strength. Has a 1-up save because he comes with plate armor. He's got a shield, he's got the 5-up from the mounts, so goes to a 1-up, which is pretty cool, and then a 4-up ward as well. On the other side is my Vampire Courtier, represented by my Bretonnian BSB, who's obviously been seduced by the vampires. And he has a 1-up rerollable, because it's also a Blood Knight, and that gives him, he has the ability from the Blood Knights, so he can choose to have a great weapon, paired weapon, shield and lance. So he has the item which gives him the gauntlets, so it gives him +1 wound, which is pretty cool. But that also allows him to have a great weapon and a 1-up save, or paired weapons and a 1-up save, which I thought was great for grinding. It's the thing that unit doesn't do. They hit hard with their lances, and then they can get stuck. So I thought having a guy in there with a great weapon and a 1-up save, pretty useful. Behind that is the Necromancer. So he's on evocation. The Vampire Lord is on occultism because he has to be. So they've got some snipes. The Vampire Lord has the 2d6 strength 5, or if you kill your own units a la occultism, he gains strength 6. That's pretty useful. And the snipe, which does strength 10, d3 wounds. So yeah, so that's pretty useful too. And then we've got two bat swarm behind, a unit of ghouls to their right, a bat swarm in front, one of which is represented by the 40mm base with the goblin stew on it. Another unit of 20 zombies. Again, to walk forward just to the left of the impassable train is the other objective. And then on my right was just because I like my models, I've got some trolls converted with wings, which are representing Vampire Swarm. I wasn't a massive fan of their rules, but I had the points to fit them in. I didn't have the points to fit in the Winged Reapers, so I ended up with just those guys. So yeah, we go to turn 1. I did a big dump of my units. I think I deployed 2 units of dogs, and then basically put my entire army down to go first. Basically, not because I particularly wanted to go first. I'm not a massive fan of going first with non-shooty armies. But basically, I knew where everything I wanted to go, so I thought, well, why not? And yeah, I put it down. Got the first turn. I think James would have needed to roll a 6, and I needed to roll a 1 to even give him a chance of getting the first turn. So yeah, so basically, I moved up with my vampire bus, basically to threaten his lord with the snipe spell. So I moved my vampire lord across, hoping to draw the scroll early. When you've got evocation, it's good to get the scroll out early. So yeah, so that was basically my plan. It gave him a pretty long charge. I thought 10 or even slightly more. And I thought, well, maybe it'll coax him forward as well, given that opportunity to charge. He's likely to fail charge. I didn't think he would charge. I mean, there's 2 fairly choppy vampires in there. He's only got the 1 character in his unit because of the spell, which split up his threat. Also, I've got Terrorgeist, and I've got Dance Macabre. So if he fails charge or just slides forward slightly, I can shove the Terrorgeist forward and scream into them, which I knew he'd be fairly scared of. So I thought with those threats that he wouldn't charge, so I felt I was fairly safe going forward to get in range with my snipes. So yeah, and that was my thought behind not putting bat swarms in front of me to redirect charges. So yeah, the Hex Wraiths move forward as well. But all in all, a fairly conservative turn. My Vampire Swarms push forward just to keep these skinks busy and not get in the way. However, he does take the charge. James being James and having his pink dice of jamminess, he smashes in there. He's keen to use those lances that the Cold and Cav come with now. And yeah, makes for a fairly interesting combat turn 1. That is a heap of points in there. There is a heap of combat ability. So yeah, interesting turn 1 charge from James. Understandable. I can see his rationale. Going in there and potentially killing a Vampire Lord turn 1. And the Necromancer. I normally would have a unit of zombies lurking at the back with the Necromancer in, just in case your Vampire Lord goes, to prevent the crumble being quite so horrible. But prior to that, I had snipes. It was actually an interesting magic phase for me. So I did the snipe which does a strength 10 D3 wound hit. Now, because of how occultism works, I can make it a snipe if I kill some dogs. I'm not sure we played this right, but basically, he elected not to roll dice at it if I didn't make it a snipe. So I killed one cold one night before he even moved. Cold one card. So comes down to the combat phase, and my red thirst vampire lord, strength 6, weapon skill 9, rolls his 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, and fail of the century. Oh my goodness, I'm in trouble now. So my vampire knights fail to roll a lethal strike. He issued a challenge with his champion, which my BSB just managed to kill, did the 1 wound. With the charge, a few wounds on the knights from the old blood. Yeah, big crumble. End up taking a wound on my vampire lord, 2 wounds on my BSB, and 2 wounds on my necromancer, just hanging on in there. So yeah, bit of a problem. Obviously now I can't regenerate the Black Knights, so at best I've got characters running around unable to join vampire units. It's not the end of the world because the shooting is fairly redundant against those guys, but yeah, and no magic. So, but yeah, slightly ominous going into the turn. Turn 2 with wounds on all of my characters and my only cavalry unit having died. So at this point, yeah, I think I'm in problem. We talked about re-racking, but I was like, nah, let's see how it pans out. Both those vampires are still fairly choppy, so we'll see how it goes. My turn 2 started well. 2 auto charges from the Hex Wraiths and the Terrorgeist. I could put the Spat Swarms forward enough to block up both his Saurus charging and his Skink Crocs with the BSB in. Now, James actually had a discussion on a forum or 2 about Skink Crocs and how James really liked the unit. I think they're a great unit. I'm pretty scared of them, to be honest, because they just do so much well. They put out a lot of attacks. They put out high strength attacks. They're relatively hard to kill quickly, and they've got a ton of ranked, and they're cold-blooded steadfast with the character in there, Leadership 8, with just the Saurus in there, just the Cayman in their Leadership 7, so they're going to stick around probably. So yeah, nasty unit, I think. So the combat with the in the middle, obviously very key combat, goes a lot better this turn. My Necromancer challenged now. Depends how you read the Blood Knight rule, whether my BSB had to challenge or not. But yeah, the old blood lopped his head off pretty quickly. The Terrorgeist Scream killed 4 guys. The Vampire Lord rolled a lot better, killed a couple. And the Great Weapon BSB killed a few more. So the Hex Wraiths didn't actually attack. This was all done through the Scream and the Vampires. The Lord being in a challenge from the Cayman Ancient side meant that he couldn't be attacked. So yeah, fairly devastating. The Lord on a double 1, no BSB, surprisingly breaks. I choose to run after him with my Terrorgeist and my my vampires, and we catch him. The Hex Wraiths reform to basically hop through units and do some damage. And yeah, because of other key moment, I cast the Evocation with my Necromancer to put wounds back on my BSB, and he scrolled it. So the scroll's gone at this point. But yeah, fairly big swinging combat. So yeah, the charge with the Lances devastated my unit, devastated my characters, but they just hung on in there. And then through Vampiric, yeah, they got their wounds back and managed to destroy that unit. So huge swing one way and then a huge swing the other in this game already, and it's turn 2. So yeah, pretty entertaining game of Knights so far. The Hex Wraith's threatening. His big choppy character's gone. My Necromancer's gone with 3 spells, so that's a big loss for bringing models back. But yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how things look at the moment. James had a sad face on, which makes me a happy man. So yeah, I was pleased at this phase that things are going well. No runes on my Terror Ghost as well, so happy days. James has his Flaming Lance Cold One guy on the right of the Saurus still, and he has a long discussion with himself about whether he puts him in or not. Basically, it comes down to a bit of a death or glory. If he can do enough wounds onto the Terrorgeist with his charge, with a Flaming Lance, the scream back from the Terrorgeist becomes a lot less scary. He should survive, and then he can win the grind probably. So he decides to do that charge, which I'm not. Oh, he also discussed whether he went into the Hex Raids. He's got his magic sword, so drops a ward save, and could make a mess of the Hex Raids, which scared him quite a lot, and understandably so. They're a nasty unit against skinks and such like. The Saurus guy charges into Terrorgeist. The Vampire Spawn have moved forward. They get chipped away quite a lot by the poison shooting. Vampires obviously need to reform from there. The Stygian Sword goes in, doesn't use his breath weapon, and makes a mess of the zombies. But they hold with sort of 10 left. The Terrorgeist screams into combat after only taking 1 wound. James fluffed his to hit roll, which, as we discussed multiple times during the game, rerolls to hit just made such a difference before, and now not rerolling to hit makes huge problems for all fighting characters. The scream goes in, wipes him out. We actually then, out of interest, rolled the dice for what would happen if he went into the Hex Raids, and a very similar result came about. That basically the AP6 from Hex Raids would have just murdered the guy, and I think to the loss of only 1 or 2 Hex Raids as well. So yeah, bad or worse, but yeah, as it works out, probably didn't make a lot of difference to the game. The Hex Wraiths then hopped through the unit of Saurus, positioned the Terrorgeist to scream into them. My BSB and Vampire Lord split so that they could move around freely, otherwise they were stuck reforming. And obviously having no musician, for some reason 2 vampires can't reform and then move, so yeah, split them up. The BSB went off to chase skinks over on my right. I then did the magic missile from occultism, which, as James said many times during the game, is bent. I boosted it to be strength 6, and between the Hex Wraiths going through and the unit, and the magic missile destroyed the Saurian unit, and the scream didn't even come into it. So, as it happens, the Saurus that charged into the Terrorgeist and did 1 wound would have died anyway, because he'd have got screamed off in my shooting phase. The Stygian, unfortunately for James, did a heap more wounds, but just not enough to pop the zombies. He was hoping to reform or be able to move off in his turn, but he was still locked in combat. He did the sensible thing and reformed in combat to give me a flank, but obviously that zombie's not going to last. So good play from James, so he can charge off out of combat and is facing the right direction next turn. Salamander moves up. But at this point, James is up against it. He feels like he can pick up a few points. I've picked up a few big units. I've picked up 2 of his characters. He's still got his BSB floating around. But I was like, at this point in the tournament, it depends where you are. If you're early game and you look 12 up, I've got a unit of zombies and a unit of ghouls who can probably hold that objective while I sell bat swarms in front of the skink crocs. I can put my vampires over to the right, chase some skinks around, not take any wounds, and disengage. And the same with the hex wraiths, get them out of dodge. Now, if you're early in a tournament and you need a 12-8, or you're quite happy with that sort of level, then that's a great idea. It wouldn't be a good idea if you need that 20-0, you table one end of the tournament and you need to sneak up. And it's also not a good thing to do on a Tuesday night in a fun game, disengage and leave James with nothing to do but walk his skink procs over to hold the other objective. So decided to make a game of it and push. At this point, James shot into the much feared Terrorgeist and took it off. I declared a charge into the skinks with my vampire. I was pretty likely to run them down if he fled, so he decided to hold. And then I charged off the skinks. As you can see, they fled, bounced through terrain, and are on the board edge. They were never going to go off if they only looked close to the board edge, because they bounced through a heap of stuff. I chucked the hex wraiths into the skink crocs, chucked my vampire lord into the BSB, and my vampire swarms in. So there's essentially 3 pretty powerful combat units there.
So in the initial round of combat, chip a wound off the BSB. He takes a wound off my lord. I've chaffed up the stonky monster at the bottom with some bats, because he can come in. He's still got his breath weapon. Didn't use that against the zombies for obvious reasons. So I'm a bit scared of him with my lord, that it will take a couple of wounds off him if I win the challenge. So we make quite a mess of the skinks. And really deplete their number, but they actually had to use the reroll from the BSB to stay in the combat. Now James chucks in a salamander into the flank of the depleted vampire swarm, just trying to grind out the combat really. I think what happened surprised us both. He basically won combat by a significant amount. The ranks, the charge flank from the salamander, a few wounds from the caimans, and even though I killed his BSB with some overkill from Red Fury, there just wasn't enough wounds done. So he popped the vampire swarm, he popped the lord, and then that left one hex wraith fighting a heap of skinks. And even I think in the next round, even if he does all his wounds, horse and rider, doesn't take any wounds, he's going to pop from combat res. Bit of a problem. Take a heap of crumble tests, take a lot of wounds on my ghouls and my zombies. Over on the other flank, the vampire standard bearer eventually manages to beat up the unit of skinks. He robbed terribly twice, and then that allows James to push into the middle. His salamander goes in against the zombies. They do what zombies only have an option of doing, and die very quickly. A game that swung either way very quickly. It looked like turn 1, James was going to charge, destroy my vampire unit, crumble test on a very low leadership army would have made a huge mess. I'd have lost all my characters. Then obviously I destroyed his knight unit, swung the other way. I looked well on top. I thought it was just a matter of time until we grind out the skink crocs. Then it's only really a question of either chaffing up his breath weapon monster until such time as the hex wraiths can go through it and make a mess, but it just wasn't to be. I think again, man of the match was the skink crocs or skink caiman unit. They just have such ranks. The cold-blooded and the leadership 7 from the caiman just keep them in the fight so long. You've got a difficult choice to take off lots of skinks with a low toughness and really rip through them and hopefully reduce the ranks that way, or do you aim at the crops and not get hit back nearly so hard? It ended up a reasonably large win to James, so I think a 15-5 or something like that. So yeah, quite a big win, but I ended up with just my BSB. James ended up with pretty much just the units you can see in this picture left. Hardly anything left on either side, a real bloodbath, which, to be honest, James and I don't tend to have. We tend to double flee and chaff each other up and not really get into combat. It's pretty rare that we charge in this way. So it was nice to have such an interesting game, a game that swung so big one way, swung so big the other way. It just shows you those, in theory, pretty basic core units like Skink Procs in 9th edition can do the damage. They can really put out hurt. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't a great matchup for his poison shooting. They took out the Terrorgeist pretty well, but that was about all. I fluffed so many hits with the Vampire, both the Vampires, the Backstone Bearer and the Lord. It just shows that change from obviously the completely different unrelated game of 8th edition to 9th age is such a big change with that drop of rerolls. It just makes fighting characters so much less reliable. The reroll ones for the predatory fighter rule just makes combat characters for Saurian Ancients much more reliable. But that said, traditionally my vampire armies don't have fighty lords just because they scare me. Putting a lord which can make your army crumble into combat is just a nasty prospect. And as you can see, even though he did really well in combat himself against Skink Procs, he just pops through res, and all it takes is that one bad round and the whole unit, the whole army dies. Afterwards, James and I had a conversation about Nosferatu, vampires, and his love for magic in 9th age has really dipped. I can see a Nosferatu vampire sitting at the back, buffing units, raising units, keeping them alive, and just pushing through that. Take multiple necromancers or vampires to keep raising back units, keep chipping away with those guys. So that's the next army I'm going to look into, which is a similar army to what I used to use in 8th edition. I did like the fighty vampire. He is good. But there's such depth in the vampire book. You can go Lamian vampires in units of knights or grave guard with weapon skill 5 and +1 to hit. That's pretty nasty from the sound of it. You can keep them alive pretty well even on foot through different items. So I can definitely see that. But yeah, there's so much depth in the vampire book. Just really interesting, lots of things to keep me busy, lots of options I'm going to have, both in terms of gaming and in terms of things that I'm now inspired to paint. So yeah, subscribe to the channel because there'll be lots more battle reports, both for 40k and 9th age coming your way. Lots of different, probably quirky armies. So subscribe to the channel. Like this, definitely comment on it, or find me on Twitter at warlocks_tower, and yeah, get in touch.